Hey everyone, in this video I'll show you how to replace sealed cartridge bearings in a Freehub body without any special tools. Now I'll be doing this procedure on my set of Hunt 35 carbon gravel disc wheels, but many wheels will follow the same process. In a previous video I outlined how to change the hub bearings on the front wheel, but the rear wheel has the added complexity of having two hub bearings and two additional bearings in the Freehub. Now the anatomy of a typical rear wheel is as follows. Now the hub is essentially a hollow cylinder with internal flanges to prevent the wheel bearings from being pressed in too far. Between the bearings is typically an alloy sleeve, but not all wheels have this. Now for the rear wheel, the Freehub body rotates independently of the hub and is what the cassette actually attaches to. It only rotates in one direction by way of typically 6 or sometimes more pawls, which are basically little spring-loaded flaps that only allow the Freehub to spin in one direction. This is the mechanism that allows you to coast without pedaling and propels you forward when you start turning the cranks. Now inside of the Freehub body itself are two additional bearings that support the load, again with an inner sleeve between the two. Often there's a small spacer between the hub bearing and the Freehub body, so make sure to keep tabs on that if one exists. Now the end caps are usually just a friction fit into the ends of the hub and are the final piece to the puzzle, and they're what actually make contact with the frame or the forks dropouts. Holding it all together is the axle, which secures the whole assembly to the frame. So with the wheel off, typically the Freehub will simply just pull off, and you can actually see the pawls and the ratcheting mechanism up close. The pawls themselves should be easy to press down, and they should spring back easily as well. Inspect the inner ratcheting surface on the hub for any damage as well. The bearings will also be apparent, and we'll need to remove these ones that have gotten really rough over the past 1,000 miles or so of riding. Just like with the wheel bearings, you'll need to slide the inner sleeve off to one side, usually just by pushing it with your fingers, but if it's tight, you can use a thin but coated surface so you don't gouge the soft alloy sleeve. There will also likely be an outer dust seal which you can pry off by carefully using a utility knife. Now with the inner sleeve offset, you can now insert a sacrificial flat blade screwdriver and set it up against the inner race of the opposite side bearing. Tap it out gently with the hammer, going around the perimeter symmetrically to try and tap the bearing out as straight as possible to avoid damage to the inner hub surface. With one bearing out, you can remove the inner sleeve and flip the Freehub over to tap out the other side. Now on one of the sides of the Freehub body, you might need some type of spacer to allow the bearing to slide out unobstructed. In this particular case, the bracket from my Garmin out front mount just happens to work perfectly. With both bearings out, you can now give the empty Freehub body a good clean. Now I might do another video on how to properly size a bearing for any particular application, but in short, you need 3 critical dimensions. You need the outer dimension of the bearing, the inner diameter of the bearing, and the height of the cartridge itself. Now thankfully, replacement cartridge bearings are generally pretty cheap unless you decide to go fully ceramic, so it's a worthwhile skill to have to be able to size and replace your own wheel bearings, both in the hub as well as in the Freehub body. Now when you're ready to install fresh bearings, a simple bearing press costs less than $5 and is made from a length of threaded rod, a few washers, and nuts. Now the main criteria are that the rod diameter must fit within the inner diameter of the bearing, the washer's outer diameter should fit over the outer race of the bearing to be pressed, and the nut can't fit through the inner hole of the washer. Now for me, it helps to mount the bottom nut of the press in a bench vise for stability. Set the washer down first and then slide on the Freehub body. We'll press in one bearing at a time. Grease the inner surface of a fully cleaned Freehub body, and then you can even spread a thin layer on the bearing outer race. You can slide the new bearing over the threaded rod, and if you're doing the outer side first, you'll need some additional spacers to clear the top lip of the Freehub body. The old bearings that you just punched out work perfectly for this. Now follow the stack up with another washer and the top nut and snug everything up, but don't start cranking down just yet. You want to try and make sure everything is lined up as straight as possible first, and then turn the nut slowly and incrementally, periodically checking to see if the bearing is being pressed in straight. If it is, you can continue to press the bearing until you meet a sudden stop, which means you'll have pressed the bearing in all the way to the inner flange. At this point, the bearing is fully pressed in and there's no need for any additional force. Flip the Freehub body over and reinstall a cleaned and greased inner sleeve, followed by a brand new cartridge bearing, again lightly greased on the outer race. Following the same process as the opposing side, carefully and incrementally press the bearing in, checking the straightness frequently. It's possible that you may need another quarter turn or so using a spacer to make sure everything sits flush and to ensure that the bearing is fully seated. Now at this point, your new bearings are installed and it's just a matter of putting it all back together. Now if your Freehub sound is too loud for you, this is actually a good opportunity to put a little bit of grease on the ratcheting surface of the Freehub. Reinstall the cassette on a well-greased Freehub body and tighten the lock ring down to 40 Newton meters. Reinstall the end caps and you can now reinstall the wheel back on the bike. Now at this point you're actually all set and you can enjoy the buttery smoothness of fresh cartridge bearings. Now if you also need to replace the cartridge hub bearings, this other video up here explains that whole process, and I'll also put a link to it down below. Feel free to drop questions or comments down below in case I missed anything, but hopefully now you're confident enough to give this repair a shot. It'll certainly save you a lot of money in labor costs to do it yourself, and as with most home repairs, it's just more gratifying to have done it yourself. Anyways, that'll wrap it up for this one. Thanks for sticking around to the end. I hope you got some good information out of it, and if you did, hitting the subscribe button helps me out a ton. I'll see you next time.